I speak to you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've been able to get outside and enjoy this fantastic weather. This was our last Sunday at Lakeshore. Tom just got here, so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people out today. They were enjoying the sunshine. But I don't know about you, it's just been beautiful lately, right? We got outside yesterday, did a ton of yard work, and then we went and saw some soccer, got to the pool. It's just nice to be outside, right? At our house, it's particularly nice to be outside right now because this past week we had our hardwood floors refinished. Have you ever gone through this process? Man, I underestimated this project altogether. I mean, we had to move all of our furniture out of the main part of the house, and then we're living in these two rooms. Two rooms, perhaps the greatest factor, one bathroom, right? So, I mean, all five of us in these two rooms and a Great Dane. Let's just say I've really gotten to know my family better this week. I really have. I didn't realize that we had so much space between us. I didn't realize that. Even though we live in the same house, we have a lot of space between us, people able to go off on their own. And I've always thought we spent a lot of time together, like we'd sit down with dinner and stuff, but it's nothing like we've lived the past week. I imagine this is what people in New York City feel like. It's not for me, I'll tell you. I feel like I need a hot plate cooking spaghetti or something, you know? But it's put me in touch. It's put me in touch with my own flesh and blood. It's put me in touch with my own flesh and blood. To know that our youngest sleeps at the bottom of the bed. I didn't know that. That one child talks in his sleep quite a bit. Or that when two of them wake up in the morning, they can't just get up and go. They have to transition to the couch for 10 minutes. I didn't know that. I'm telling you, I've learned a lot about my own flesh and blood. Flesh and blood. It's a curious phrase, flesh and blood. But when I read today's gospel, I'm struck by what Jesus is saying about his flesh and blood. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me and I in them. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me and I in them. And that, they say, is a hard saying. Not only is it hard, it's offensive. It's offensive. In fact, it's so offensive, many of Jesus' followers left him, right? That's what it says. So do you get why it's offensive? Well, when we talk about eating flesh and drinking blood even today, don't you kind of cringe? Something inherent in it? It's something in us, right? When I talk about this passage to kids, they immediately go to vampires. Right? In other words, it's kind of dark. It's kind of dark stuff. And for the Jews back then, there's another level of being offended because blood was so sacred to the Jewish people. It was the life force of beingness. Their kosher laws come out of this idea. So to drink blood is very offensive. And then there's the entire cannibalism thing going on eating human flesh. It's dark stuff, right? So yes, this is a hard and even offensive saying. But go further with me. What do you think Jesus was getting at? What do you think? Our tradition tells us that God became man in the person of Jesus Christ, and Jesus is telling us that if we eat his flesh and drink his blood, we abide in him and he in us. In other words, God became flesh and blood so that we would become the flesh and blood of God. God became flesh and blood so that we would become the flesh and blood of God. We, you, me, are the flesh and blood of God. Now that's a hard saying. That's a hard saying, especially for those of you that grew up in traditions that just told you how bad you are all the time. But that is what Jesus is trying to get at, to get us to understand that Jesus is the God-man. We share in that godness. We share in that godness. We participate in God. Again, we are the flesh and blood of God. You are. You are. It's a lot to take on, actually. It's a huge deal that we are the flesh and blood. But Jesus gives us this ritual so we can experience and realize this every week to remind us of who we really are. It reminds us of who we really are, who each one of us really is. Okay? So this really hit home for me the other week. Wednesday mornings, out here in the courtyard on the labyrinth. We've been doing Eucharist, and it's a silent Eucharist on the labyrinth. I've talked about it before from the pulpit because for me it's a very powerful experience, and I really do encourage all of y'all to come out, talk to us if you don't know how to do it. It combines two old Christian traditions, and it works. It works. I'm telling you, it works. What we do is we gather outside, and we quietly walk the labyrinth while praying. And the labyrinth is this zigzag kind of trail to the middle. It's like a maze, except there are no dead ends, right? There's one way in, it leads you to the middle, and then you walk your way out, and it leads you out. So what we do is we put some bread and some wine in the center, and we walk the labyrinth together. Again, nothing is said. Nothing is said. It's just the ritual, and we walk out. So I'm out there a few weeks ago with a couple of other people, and we're going to do this. It's a nice summer morning. You know, it's not hot yet. It's very pleasant. The bread and the wine are sitting there in the middle. So we begin. And I'm walking this thing, saying prayers. I'm trying to calm my mind down, and I'm about halfway in the middle of the labyrinth. I haven't gotten to the center yet, but I'm about halfway getting there when this person comes into the courtyard. And it's one of our street people. I know her, you know. I've given her food when she's hungry before. And here she comes right into the courtyard. And we're silently walking the labyrinth, and she comes in, and she's wanting some breakfast of some sort. And so she's asking me to get her some. Now, I don't think she realized that we were praying at first, because she's just thinking about breakfast, right? And the poor thing is either on drugs or coming off of drugs or some combination of the two. You know what I mean? You can tell. And you can tell by her body movements. So, you know, it's this huge distraction in a way for the three of us who are walking the labyrinth. So I go over and I tell her, as soon as we're done praying, we're going to have communion. Please join us, and I'll get you some breakfast after that. So she does. She sits down on one of the benches out there. So I go back, start walking the labyrinth again. I have to admit, I was a little frustrated because I've had this interruption because I have what I call monkey brain, okay? I have a monkey brain when it comes to meditation. My mind goes all over the place, right? And monkey brains are hard to train. So it took me a while, but I get back in the groove and I continue walking the labyrinth. But as the labyrinth twists and turns, I see her over there on the bench. She's just rocking back and forth. You know, she's kind of hurting. But she's being quiet. She's just waiting on us. And my monkey brain won't stop. How did she get this way? What is her past? What makes addicts addicts? Should I stop what I'm doing and go get her some cereal? Or is getting her cereal really the best thing for her? Maybe that's enabling her. What is the right thing to do? So I'm going through all this stuff, this whole litany of thoughts and questions in my mind. When finally I arrive at the center of the labyrinth, I arrive there and there's the bread and wine. So I'm the first one in the center. The other two join me. And it's time for us to have communion. So I pick up the bread, and I pick up the wine, and I raise them up in the air as if I'm giving thanks to God for the bread and the wine. And as I'm doing this, I notice that our friend on the bench has walked over and joined us in the center of the labyrinth. So now there are four of us standing in the middle with the bread and the wine. Let me tell you, when I broke that bread, like we do every Sunday here up at the altar, but when I broke that bread that morning, I could feel the whole world breaking. I could feel it, the whole world. All the brokenness of the world was right there in that moment. All the sadness and loss was right there. I mean, I don't know if I can get this across to you. It's hard to describe it. All four of us who were there, we were all broken together. Suddenly, the street person's brokenness was no longer just her brokenness. Her brokenness was all of our brokenness. We all shared in it together. In fact, we were all the same in that moment. Sure, she's broken, but I'm broken too, right? We're all broken together. And then when we ate the bread and drank the wine, a change took place. I no longer saw her as a problem that needed fixing. I no longer saw her as another thing I needed to deal with, another issue in my life. Instead, I saw her as the beautiful person that God made, and through the missing teeth, the straggly hair, the dirty clothes, what I saw was that she was indeed the very flesh and blood of God. She is the flesh and blood of God. We are all the flesh and blood of God. My brothers and sisters, we are not separate from one another. We are not, and I know it feels like we are most of the time, but we are not separate. We are connected in a way that is beautiful, so wonderful, so godly. We are connected. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. So now when you hear this flesh and blood talk in John's gospel, maybe don't cringe so much. Maybe take that to mean that we are truly God's children. We are God's flesh and blood. And then fully realize what all that implies. We are all connected. We are all beloved. We are all so wonderful. Even that person you can't seem to get along with, even that person that is very difficult for you, or that person who is so very different from you, so very just fill in the blank, right? Just fill in the blank. So when you get frustrated with that someone, whether it's today, tomorrow, maybe in a few minutes, when you get frustrated, just remember that they are the flesh and blood of God. Perhaps that will change the way you see them, which in turn will help change the way you see the world. Perhaps that will make us all see each other the same way God sees each one of us. We are God's flesh and blood. It's not an easy saying. It is quite offensive, but it is also the good news. Amen.